Jambo. It is my hope that you are all doing well and keeping safe in the midst of the current pandemic. Welcome to the seventh lesson of financial accounting, that is correction of accounting errors. So, what are errors? I know you all understand what errors are. As human beings, we are prone to making errors on a day to day basis. We are not perfect. So, the same case applies with accounting. We are prone to making errors when recording transactions in the books of accounts. So you find that we make errors here and there, and these errors will affect the true and fair view of the financial statements that we've prepared. They'll also affect our financial statements, in that you may find that the balance sheet will not balance at all, and that will be a headache to us. So you find the financial statements that are not properly done, they do not reflect the true and fair view of the affairs of the business, and at the same time, they do not balance at all because of these errors. So it is important that we understand these errors in accounting and look at how these errors should be corrected. So in most cases, you'll find that a correction of accounting errors, we need to prepare journal entries. And we haven't done journal entries before, but here in this lesson, we shall do an application of journal entries, and I hope that journal entries will not be new to you anymore. So for errors in accounting, we normally have two major types of errors. That is errors not affecting the trial balance and errors affecting the trial balance. So for the first ones, that is the errors not affecting the trial balance. You find that the trial balance will still balance. Yeah, you know the trial balance ought to balance to show that our accounting procedure has been okay. But with these errors not affecting the trial balance, you find that the trial balance will still balance. That is, the total of the debit side shall be equal to the total of the credit side. So these errors will not be disclosed at all by the trial balance, because the trial balance will still balance, indicating that there is nothing wrong with our books, yet there is something that is wrong. So we need to identify these errors and correct them, yet they do not affect the trial balance. And then number two, we have those errors that affect the trial balance. So when these errors are there, even if it is one of them, you'll find that the trial balance will not balance at all. Yeah, so this will give us a headache of trying to find out this error that is causing our trial balance not to balance. So these errors will be disclosed by the trial balance because the total of the debit side will not be equal to the total of the credit side. The trial balance will not balance. So as usual, you know that if the trial balance doesn't balance, then there is a problem. Yeah, so these errors will easily be identified because the trial balance will not balance. So let us go deeper. We look at the errors not affecting the trial balance. The errors not affecting the trial balance are classified into five, sorry. So these errors, as we have said, they are not disclosed. They are not disclosed by the trial balance because they do not affect the trial balance. So there are mainly three types of errors not affecting the trial balance. So we have the first one there. That is the errors of omission. Yeah. So an error of omission. So an error of omission occurs when a transaction is completely omitted from the books of accounts. That is, when a transaction is completely not recorded in the books of accounts. Say, for instance, a purchase has been made by cash. Yeah. So in this case, we make an error of not debiting the purchases account and not crediting the cash account. So you find that there's no effect on the two sides of the ledger. There's no debit entry, there is no credit entry. This will not at all affect the trial balance because the transaction has completely been omitted from the books of accounts. The transaction has not been entered in the books. As such, there will be no effect in the books of accounts. The debit side of the ledger and the credit side of the ledger will not be affected. So it will be a zero effect. As such, there will be no effect on the trial balance. And then number two, we have the errors of commission. Yeah, an error of commission occurs when a transaction is made in the wrong account of the same class. So you remember our classification of accounts, I believe, in our second lesson. So we had the personal accounts and the impersonal accounts. and then under the impersonal accounts, you had the real accounts and the nominal accounts. So it may happen for errors of commission, we post into a wrong account of the same class. So for instance, as you are given here, that goods sold to A. Smith on credit for 5,000 shillings are debited in the account of J. Smith. This will be an error of principle. So in this case, we note that A. Smith and J. Smith are two different persons, but they are both debtors. Yeah, so they are in the class of debtors, but they are different debtors. So we have A. Smith and J. Smith. So in this case, a credit entry that ought to have been made in the books of A. Smith has been made in the books of J. Smith. So in this case, the effect will still be the same on the two sides of the ledger. So you find that we still have a credit entry in the ledger, but in the wrong account. Yeah. So the effect of 500 has been felt on the correct side of the ledger, but in the wrong account. So this will also not affect the trial balance. Yeah. So the 5,000 shillings has gone to the right side of the ledger, but on the wrong account. So this will be an error. But in the end, it doesn't affect the trial balance because the two sides of the ledger have been affected equally. So such an error of commission is one of the types of errors not affecting the trial balance. Then number 3, errors not affecting the trial balance is the error of principle. So this is an entry of a transaction in the wrong class of account. Yeah. So still to our classification of accounts. So you find an error has been made that we have posted in the wrong class of account. So we were supposed to say, for example, to post in the personal account, but we have posted in the impersonal account, but on the same side, on the debit side. So you find that the effect will still be the same. So for instance, if the purchase of machinery, which is an asset, is debited to the purchases account, this will be an error of principle. So in this case, machinery is an asset, purchases is an expense. So those are two different classes of accounts, an asset and an expense. But in this case, we find that we still made a debit. Yeah. So we ought to have debited in the purchases account, but we have debited in the machinery account, which will be wrong. Yeah. So we ought to have debited in the machinery account, sorry, but we have debited in the purchases account, which is wrong. Yeah. So you understand that when we purchase a machinery, it should go to the debit of the machinery account. But now, for example, that's gone to the debit of the purchases account, which in this case is wrong. But you'll find that in the end, owing to this, the trial balance will not be affected because we still have a debit of the same amount. Yeah. So the effect that should have been there on the debit side is still there, but in the wrong account class. So this will not also affect the trial balance. So as such, we say that errors of principle are also types of errors that do not affect the trial balance. And then we have number 4, the errors of original entry. So an error of original entry is that which occurs at the initial stages of recording in the books of accounts. Yeah. So like they say in IT, garbage in, garbage out. Yeah. So you enter garbage into the system and the output you get is garbage. The error of original entry. So it depends on what you put in the books of accounts. If you key in an error, the same error will be taken to the debit side and it will be taken to the credit side, and the effect on the balance sheet, on the trial balance will still be the same. So for instance, an invoice of 950 shillings being entered in the purchases day book as 590. Yeah. So you enter 590 shillings in this case on the debit side of purchases account and the credit side of the creditor. So on the debit side, in the purchases account, you enter 590 instead of 950, and on the credit side of the in the creditor's account, you enter 590 instead of 950. So the effect will still be the same on both sides. The only difference is that you've entered the wrong amount. Yeah, so garbage in, garbage out. So the effect on both sides of the ledger, that is the debit side and the credit side, will still be the same, will still be equal. So as such, the trial balance will still balance. But but in this case, after having entered the incorrect amount. So we also need to correct these figures, these errors not affecting the trial balance, because they will affect the true and fair view of the financial statement. And then the fifth type of error that are not affecting the trial balance is compensating errors. Compensating errors are those which compensate each other. So you make an error here, and by coincidence, you make another error somewhere else that compensates this error. Yeah. So for instance, assuming the purchases account was over added by 50 shillings, and similarly, the sales account was also over added by 50 shillings. So you find that these are two unrelated errors, two unrelated errors, but by coincidence, they compensate each other. So on one side, you over added 50 shillings in the purchase account. And then at another point in time, you over added 50 shillings in the sales account. So you find that the effect on the two sides of the ledger is still equal. You over added here on the debit side, and you over credited on the credit side by coincidence through unrelated errors. So these are compensating errors, and they do not affect the trial balance, because by coincidence compensate each other. So to correct for errors not affecting the trial balance, we debit the account that is wrongly credited, and we credit the account that is the correct account, and vice versa. You debit the correct account, you credit the account wrongly debited. So we shall do an example to illustrate that. But in the meantime, let us look at this example that is in the books of M. Kamau, or the audit of the books of M. Kamau's books for the year ended 31st December, revealed the following errors. So number one, a machine costing 1,200 shillings has been debited to the purchase account. This is an error of principle, yeah, as you have seen, an error of principle in that you have posted in the wrong class of account. So the machine ought to have been debited in the machine's account, but in this case it has been incorrectly debited in the purchases account. So the effect is still the same on the debit side, but in this case in the wrong class, that you have debited in the wrong class, that is in the purchase account instead of in the machine account. So to correct for this error, we reverse the incorrect entry that had been made in the purchases account. That is by crediting purchases account and debiting what should have been debited. That is, we debit the machine's account by 1,200 shillings, as you can see. So you debit the machine account and credit the purchases account. Number two, goods purchased from A Barton for 150 shillings were credited to the account of J Barton. This is another error, an error of commission, whereby we posted to the wrong account of the same class. So we should have debited in the account of A Barton, but we have credited to the, or we should have credited to the account of A Barton, but we have wrongly credited to the account of G Barton. Yeah. So still we have a credit, yeah, on the credit side of 150. So there is no effect on the two sides of the ledger. As such, the balance sheet will still balance. So to correct for this error, we reverse the incorrect entry in G Barton's account. So it had been credited. So to reverse the credit, we debit. So therefore, we debit the G Barton's account. Yeah, we debit the G Barton's account, and then we credit the A Barton account, the correct account that should have been credited. So therefore, we credit A Barton, debit G Barton. So as you can see, we debit G Barton, credit A Barton, as I had said, yeah. So you ought to have credited A button and debited G button. So that is what you see. So therefore you debit G button to reverse. So to reverse an initial credit entry, we debit, and then we debit what should have been debited, like it's shown there. Then number 3, an invoice from A Smith of 270 shillings was omitted. Yeah. So this is an error of omission. So an invoice is a document that signifies a credit purchase or sale. So when we receive an invoice, it means that we have bought on credit basis. Yeah. So the supplier has given us an invoice, showing meaning that we owe him. We are supposed to pay him the amount that is indicated in the invoice. So if we receive an invoice from A Smith, it means that we've bought from him on credit basis. As such, we ought to have debited purchases account and credited A Smith's account. That is the supplier who gave us the invoice. But in this case, we are told that this invoice was omitted. This is an error of omission, a transaction that has not been entered completely in the books of account. So we ought to have debited purchases account and credited A Smith's account. But since this was not done, then we ought to do this. We ought to debit purchases account and credit A Smith's account accordingly. So therefore, to correct for this error, we debit purchases account, we credit A Smith's account. And I believe that is what has been done. Debit purchases account and credit A Smith's account. Then we have the fourth error. That is goods sold to A White for 175 shillings were entered in the sales day book as 157. So this is an error of original entry. So we entered garbage. So this garbage affects the both sides of the ledger equally, and the trial balance will not balance. So we need to correct for this. So goods sold to A White for 175 were entered in the sales day book as 157. So they were under posted. So we are, instead of posting 175, we posted 157, which is less. So to correct for this, we need to add the deficit. The deficit here is 175 minus 157, which is around 18 shillings, yeah, I think. So we posted less by 18 shillings. So therefore, we need to add the 18 shillings. So what means here is that when we sold goods to A White for 175, we ought to have credited sales account and debited A White account with 175. But by error, we debited A White's account by 157 and credited sales account by 157. So we need to correct for that by adding the 18 shillings that is the deficit. That is by debiting A White with 18 shillings and crediting sales by 157 shillings. And I believe that is what has been done. We debit A White 18 shillings and credit sales account by 18 shillings. Then move on to the last transaction. That is salaries and wages account were over added by 35 shillings and rent received account were also over added by 35 shillings. So this is an error, is a compensating error. So two unrelated errors that by coincidence have compensated each other. So in this case, we have added salaries account by 35 and we also have added rent received by 35. So we need to, since this was an over addition, we need to deduct it. Yeah. So salaries and wages account were debited by an excess of 35. So to reverse this, we need to credit the salaries and wages account by 35, and rent received account were over credited by 35 shillings. So to reverse this, we debit the rent received account by 35 shillings. So therefore, to correct for this error, we credit salaries and wages account by 35 and debit rent received account by 35 shillings, as shown here. So debit rent received account by 35 and debit salaries and wages account. Sorry, debit sales and debit rent received account by 35 and credit salaries and wages account by 35 shillings. and credit salaries and wages account by 5 shillings. So we shall do an example to illustrate this, and I hope that you review these notes after this video just to get a deeper, a better understanding of the errors not affecting the trial balance. So those were errors not affecting the trial balance. We proceed now, we look at errors affecting the trial balance. So errors affecting the trial balance, we said that this will affect the trial balance because the trial balance will not balance. The trial balance will not balance in respect to these errors. That is the errors affecting the trial balance. So to correct for errors affecting the trial balance, we use the suspense account. We use the suspense account to correct these errors that do not affect the trial balance. Yeah. So we use the suspense account to correct the errors not affecting the trial balance. Okay, apologies for that. We are at errors affecting the trial balance, which are corrected by the suspense account. These errors will affect the trial balance. The trial balance will not balance, even if it's just one error that has taken place. So for correction of these errors, so let's pay attention to this paragraph. So for the correction of these errors, a suspense account is opened and the difference in the trial balance is posted in this account. That is a suspense account. If the debit side of a trial balance is smaller, then this amount is debited in the suspense account and vice versa. That is to say, if the credit side of the trial balance is smaller, then this difference is credited in the suspense account. Yeah. So we open a suspense account and we debit the suspense account if the debit side of the trial balance is less. And we credit the suspense account if the credit side of the trial balance is less. Then, when all the errors are discovered, they are corrected by double entry through the suspense account. When all the errors have been discovered and corrected, the balance on the suspense account is eliminated. So we shall have to do an example to illustrate this. So for instance, we have this example. A trial balance was extracted from the books of Barkey, and it was found that the debit side exceeded the credit side by 400 shillings. This amount was entered in the suspense account. Subsequently, the following errors were credited. So one, the purchase account was over-added by 200 shillings, and then an amount of paid to Smith was debited to his account as 980 instead of 890, and the sales account were under-added by 110 shillings. So in this case, okay, these two are, we are told that the credit side of the trial balance, the debit side, that we are told that the debit side exceeded the trial balance by 400 shillings. So the credit side was less. So therefore, you open the suspense account and credit this. So if the credit side of the trial balance is less, then we post the difference on the credit side, as you can see here. So as we have balance as per the trial balance, that is 400 shillings. And then we correct the errors. So the first error is purchases were over-added by 200 shillings. So if purchases were over-added by 200 shillings, so in this case, we only have the problem in the purchases account. Yeah. So when we make a purchase, say by cash, we are supposed to credit cash, debit purchases. So in this case, we are not told anything about the other account that was affected by this purchase. So you assume that the other account was okay. So the only problem was in the purchases account, which was over-added by 200 shillings. So it means when we make a purchase, we're supposed to debit the purchases account. So in this case, the purchases account was over-debited by 200 shillings. So to correct for this, we credit the purchases account by 200 shillings. And then to fulfill the double entry, we debit the suspense account by the 200 shillings. And that is what you can see here. On the suspense account, we've debited purchases. We've debited the suspense account by purchases 200 shillings. Yeah. So to correct for this error, we credit the purchases account by 200 shillings and then we debit the suspense account by 200 shillings, as you can see here. Then B, an amount paid to A. Smith was debited to his account as 980 instead of 890. So in this case, you ought to have debited. You ought to have debited 890, but he debited less by 980. So an amount paid to A. Smith was debited to his account. So in this case, this transaction, assuming we paid by cash, you ought to have credited cash by 980 and debited A. Smith by 980. So you are not told of any problem with the cash account. So the problem is with this is in the Smith's account, which was debited with 980, which was excess. Yeah, you're getting. We should have debited A. Smith's account with 890, but we debited it with 980, which is an excess. A difference of say, difference of how much? 90 shillings. Yeah, so you over debited with 90 shillings. So to correct for this, we need to reverse the over debiting in the A. Smith's account by crediting. So therefore, you credit the difference of 90 shillings in A. Smith's account, and to fulfill the rules of double entry, we debit the suspense account with 90 shillings, as you can see here. So we've debited the sales account, suspense account with 90 shillings. We've corrected for that. And then we move on to the third one, that error, that is the sales account was under added by 90 shillings, by 110 shillings. So it means that sales account on the ought to have been credited, but in this case they were credited with less 110 shillings. So to correct for this, we need to add the under addition. So you need to add the under addition in the sales account, and we all know that to add in the sales account, we're supposed to credit. So therefore, you're supposed to credit the sales account by 110 shillings in this case. And then to fulfill the rules of double entry, we therefore debit the suspense account by 110 shillings, as you can see there. Then those are the only errors that we had. So we then add them. We then balance off our account. So on the debit side, we have 200 plus 90 plus 110. It gives us 400 shillings, which is equal to this other side. Yeah, and then both sides it's 400 shillings. So we have our balance now. The balance, we have a zero balance in this case because the total of both sides is equal. So with suspense account, when we're supposed to correct all the errors until the balance in the suspense account is eliminated. So after you've corrected all the errors, we end up with a zero balance in the suspense account. Yeah. So you are sure that you have corrected all the errors when the suspense account balance is eliminated. So like in our case, the balance of 400, the one that we began with, has been eliminated in that we have a zero balance, in that the suspense account has balanced off. Yeah, has balanced off without any problem. So the total of the debit side and the credit side is equal. So as you can revert to this paragraph here that says that when all errors have been discovered and corrected, the balance on the suspense account is eliminated. Yeah. So our suspense account needs to balance after correcting all the errors. And by balancing, it means that there should be a zero balance. The totals of the debit side and the credit side should be equal. So, and then we look at another example. We look at another example in the next part of this video. End meeting for all.